welcome everyone again, and thank you so much for staying with us for the next symposium day. Yesterday, we had about 500 attendees for the lecture of Professor Teun van Dijk about critical discourse analysis as a key method to study anti-minority discourses, as well as genocide denial and distortion. And we had participants from all over Southeast Asia, Cambodia, Myanmar, Thailand, Philippines, and also from Indonesia, but also some participants from Eastern Europe. This symposium is organized within the project of identifying and countering Holocaust distortions, lessons for and from Southeast Asia. And this project is supported by International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance and Heinrich Böll Stiftung Cambodia. The project aims to identify narratives about the Holocaust in the region. We focus on Cambodia, Myanmar, and Thailand, and develop counter strategies and counter-arguments against these distortions in the region. And there are many examples of distortion of Holocaust in the region, and we will be discussing it for the next 3 days. And also the project aims to inspire critical discourses, memory discourses about local instances of genocide and conflict. During last month, we worked with regional researchers in those countries to assess the situation in these countries. We are also now finalizing and preparing our final publication, as well as a digital exhibition about Holocaust distortion and genocide distortion in the region, which soon will be available in English, but also in other versions in Burmese, Cambodian, and Thai languages on our website. And please follow, so I'm sharing the links, and you can follow it during the next days and weeks. It will be more updated. With very small Jewish populations in those countries, nevertheless, we can say there is a historical presence of Jews in these lands. For example, in Myanmar, and we will be discussing it in the next during the next day tomorrow. Within this year, also we organized a series of seminars and meetings where we discussed what is the Holocaust, who are Jewish people, what is anti-Semitism, what is Holocaust denial and distortion, and we had such speakers as Professor Jan Tomasz Gross, Jeremy Jones, Ellen Korman-Mainz, Mark Weitzman, Sarah Lombard from the Holocaust Memorial Museum, and many others. So we have our network, and we are very proud for work which was done. And the symposium just also expanded our network, and that is why we invited also other people who didn't have chance to participate in our seminars previously. Our project has been supported by Heinrich Böll Stiftung Cambodia and by International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And perhaps I need to say some words about International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And my colleague now is sharing in the chat the links to the website and to the definition of a Holocaust distortion and Holocaust denial proposed by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which unites governments and experts to strengthen, advance, and promote Holocaust education, research, and remembrance. And I kindly ask my colleague to share more information about the definition which IHRA proposed, and we use it during our work for this year and also for our research. We also refer to this definition, and which we will be discussing. And today we will have a very interesting program, actually. And we will have speakers. We have Robert Williams with an overview of Holocaust distortion and how it relates to anti-Semitism. We will have a keynote by Professor Yehuda Bauer, and this session will be chaired by Professor Dina Porat. And our colleague from Bangladesh, Faisal Shahriaratu, who is a very active participant in our project, and he participated in all our meetings, seminars this year. He prepared special questions to share with a keynote speaker and with the chair of a session. So from the perspective of a person from Asia, where there is not so big Jewish population. And the evening session today will include a discussion about the Holocaust denial and distortion in Cambodia, and keynote by Professor Ben Kernan. But before before this, and first of all, I would like now to give the floor to Raymond, who represents the American University of Phnom Penh, that supported us in this project and especially for this symposium. Raymond is Associate Vice President of Academic and Student Affairs of American University of Phnom Penh, a native of the United States of California. He has lived and worked in Cambodia for nearly 2 decades, serving as a university professor, faculty dean, and governmental advisor and development consultant. And he also worked at other universities in Cambodia, such as Royal University of Law and Economics in Phnom Penh and Panasatra University of Cambodia. And we would like to thank you very much, the American University of Phnom Penh, for supporting our initiative, inviting students, professors, and it's my glad pleasure to give the floor to Raymond now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalia. It's a pleasure to join all of you. And I will be coming in and out of sessions tonight, but I will try to make as much as I can. I think it's just a fascinating program. And I want to thank all of you for joining, and I'm happy that we have our students interested in this. You know, this area of Holocaust distortion, denial, is something that I think is very much related to issues of education. We as educators have a duty to demand of our students, if that's the right word to use, I think so, to ask our students in their studies, particularly in their studies of history and in other subjects, but we're talking about history here, to be rigorous. And rigorous meaning training them to use their thinking skills, to be able to look at evidence. I think part of the problem that we have, of course, in this era of social media, issues of disinformation are widely distributed, or disinformation is widely distributed. And there's no questioning of the factual basis and of these assertions. And you know, the problem that we have, and we've had for many years, and it's becoming an even more serious problem with social media, is not demanding or not holding people accountable when they make decisions. And what I mean by holding people accountable, asking them, where do they get this evidence? What is this based on? And for me, as someone who is also trained in history, I am a strong believer in looking at the facts, looking at the evidence. Where do the facts take us? You know, I wrote an article in my graduate time, an academic article on General Eisenhower and what he did at the end of the war. And what General Eisenhower did, as many of you know, he immediately had film units go across all the concentration camps that were being liberated, and have everything filmed. Have everything filmed before there was any opportunity to hide the evidence. And he documented everything on film. And you know, scholars, whatever we may think about later President Eisenhower, we owe a debt of gratitude to General Eisenhower for what he did in terms of making sure that this documentation, particularly visual evidence of what happened in the concentration camps. These are things that add to our knowledge and also provide the evidence that we can use to answer these deniers or distorters. Because basically what we're dealing with in the society is this lack of, as I say, rigor, this lack of looking at facts when people present facts. This is what I try to teach my students. I've taught a class on media literacy. I think this particular subject is key in teaching young people about media literacy. Where do you get this information? And so I think as an academic, and I know my colleague, Professor Teresa, who will be involved in the program later today, can speak to this as well. We guide young people, we train them, or I don't know, training is a good word, but we mentor them, we inspire them, and we demand of them to have those skills that make them not only citizens of their own society in their own country, but citizens of the world. And one of them is being able to look at facts. And when you have something, for example, that like we talked about the Holocaust in World War II, the documentation was overwhelming. But as General Eisenhower realized, this all had to be documented. And of course, this was these films and these documents were used during the Nuremberg trials and were very effective. I think we're fortunate here in Cambodia, speaking as someone who has lived and worked in Cambodia for nearly 2 decades, that we've, for our situation during the Khmer Rouge era, we are very lucky to have several institutions that have been able to document what went on during that period in Cambodia from 1975 to 1979, particularly during that period. We have the Documentation Center of Cambodia. We have the work of Professor Kiernan, who will speak later today, and other scholars who have compiled voluminous material relating to what happened during this period. We also have the Tuol Sleng Museum, the Tuol Sleng Prison, which also includes documentation of what happened during that period. And we also have the Bopana Center. And if you ever have a chance to visit Cambodia, the Bopana Center has an incredible collection of audiovisual material of that period that they combined, that they were able to compile very carefully. And I see that my colleague, Mr. Chiasopip, is here from Bopana Center, and they have done just a tremendous job of collecting material related to that period. And if you ever visit Cambodia, like I said, I would very highly recommend you visiting the Bopana Center. So we here in Cambodia have done a lot to create this data that are available, that can discuss, that can be available for scholars and young people to access. I also think about the extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge Tribunal that is wrapping up right now. I think people can argue about the outcome of this tribunal, but I think one of the important outcomes of this tribunal, like in Nuremberg, was the documentation. The evidence that was brought out is now part of the record. It will be included in archives that the court will create after it ends its mandate. And like with Nuremberg, we will have material. We will have facts. And as I say, it's cliche to say, but the facts don't lie. But I think this is an important aspect of what we deal with in society, but particularly as educators. So in closing, I want to thank all of you. I'm very excited to be asked to give some opening remarks. We at AUPT are very proud to be part of this initiative, this mandate. And we also are very happy to have Professor Teresa be part of this program. So my thanks to everyone, and best wishes for the rest of the program. I'm looking forward to seeing the speakers and hearing from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raymond Lewis, and thank you for work you are doing in Cambodia at the university and students, and for openness to discuss the issues and to support us. Thank you so much. And before giving the floor to our next speaker, I would like also to have two announcements. First of all, please, there is possibility to have interpretation into Cambodian, Khmer language. So as you can see, you just need to switch to another language. It's possible, it's easier. And if you have any problems or questions, just write to me in the chat personally, and I will help you with interpretation. And the second announcement, that yesterday we had 500 participants, and today we have less. So I invite people who are attendees, because we have this webinar option, to join us in Zoom. So it will be more as a meeting, more inclusive, more interactive. So if some people don't want to accept, you can stay as attendee, but we basically invite everyone, and the only request is to stay muted during the presentation. So if possible. So when I was sending you invitation to be a panelist, you can accept it, or it's up to you, but you can be with us. So now our next speaker, Dr. Robert Williams, who unfortunately is not with us personally because there is holiday, Thanksgiving Day in the United States, but he recorded his presentation 1 week ago, and my colleague will share it with you now. And he is a Deputy Director for International Affairs at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And also he's on the steering committee of Global Task Force on Holocaust Distortion, and served for 4 years as a chair of a committee on Anti-Semitism and Holocaust Denial at the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And he regularly advises international organizations and governments on anti-Semitism and Holocaust issues, and is currently overseeing a major initiative that assesses European Holocaust and genocide denial laws. And Robert's research include German history, US and Russian foreign policy, disinformation, and contemporary anti-Semitism. So, and I would like to invite now my colleague, Samantha, from Whenever Again, to share her screen and show us his presentation. Thank you very much. And please don't forget to put your comments or questions on the chat. Thank you.
My name is Dr. Robert Williams. I'm going to talk about the issue of Holocaust distortion and denial today. And I think it's important to remember that as we're talking about the issue of Holocaust distortion, that there are a number of factors behind the rise of distortion as we see it appearing across multiple cultures and societies. These factors include the attempts of many governments on both the political left and the political right to create useful pasts that they can use to rally populist support. There's also an increased willingness to believe that facts are somehow unfactual today. Just think of the number of climate deniers that are out there. There's a general environment, general culture, if you will, that supports the so-called post-truth trend. There are also more and more people who are succumbing to base hatreds and base biases and hatreds like anti-Semitism. And there are also indicators that societies at large are beginning to subscribe and believe more in various conspiracy theories, especially anti-Semitic conspiracy myths. All of these factors influence and are influenced by distortion of the Holocaust. But let's focus on Holocaust distortion because it is an essential element. What are we talking about here? How is Holocaust distortion different from the related phenomenon of Holocaust denial? Well, Holocaust denial is somewhat easy to wrap our heads around. A Holocaust denier tries to convince people that the Holocaust and occasionally related atrocities did not take place. Holocaust deniers are essentially trying to make anti-Semitism acceptable, to claim that the Holocaust never happened and was just the product of a great plot. This means that Holocaust denial is anti-Semitism, and it is a significant problem. But in many parts of the world, especially in Europe and North America, it's considerably less common today than the related issue of Holocaust distortion. At the simplest level, Holocaust distortion excuses, minimizes, or otherwise misrepresents the Holocaust both as an historical event and as something that has relevance on our lives today. Holocaust distortion is tricky because most forms of distortion do not deny the reality of the Holocaust, at least not per se. And it's also potentially difficult to identify the motives behind Holocaust distortion. Is somebody distorting for cynical, hateful reasons, or simply because they don't know the facts? It really doesn't matter at the end of the day, because if you allow for or excuse Holocaust distortion, you contribute to the erosion of our understanding of the Holocaust. On a moral level, Holocaust distortion is an insult to the memories of the victims and the survivors of the Holocaust. On a practical level, it can act as a gateway drug, if you will, to conspiracy theory, to Holocaust denial, and to more dangerous forms of anti-Semitism. Older forms of Holocaust distortion and denial used to play havoc with Holocaust history. These trends, or these forms of distortion, were often easy enough to counter with historical facts and with archival documentation. We also see attempts to excuse or minimize the relevance of the Holocaust. This is something seen in some of the countries where the Holocaust occurred. And it can take the form of suggestions that the Holocaust is either not an important part of national history or that locals did not play a role in crimes against Jews. I want to focus in on the second case for a moment. Let's say you lived in a country where the Holocaust took place. Why might your government, or populist nationalists, or society at large subscribe to the notion that the Holocaust was not an important part of your history? Quite simply, because the Holocaust and the reality that it required more than just German initiative presents an uncomfortable truth. You see, the Holocaust was an international act of genocide, not just because it transgressed national borders. Now, without the Nazis, the Holocaust would never have happened. This is true. Nazi Germany was the essential factor. But the Nazis also required local collaborators in some of the countries they occupied to assist in the crimes. Sometimes these collaborators would be local townspeople or local police or others co-opted into occupation governments. And other times, Nazi allied countries like Romania, the independent state of Croatia, or Hungary actively engaged in crimes against Jews. In fact, one of the first major atrocities against Jews occurred not in a region under German control, but in Iași, Romania, where between late June and early July 1941, following orders from the head of the Romanian government, Romanian forces and local mobs murdered more than 13,266 Jews in the streets of that city. Now, Romania is a bit of an exception today because the Romanian government has actually taken positive steps to address the realities of Holocaust history in that country. But in many other countries where similar crimes took place, there's instead a desire to run away from the past, to obscure discussion of the Holocaust, to avoid uncomfortable questions about the actions of one's grandparents, great-grandparents, and others. Instead, a different tale of history is told, one of victimization under the Nazis, where dominant ethnic groups were the primary victims, or simply attempts to present the Holocaust as something that happened over there, somewhere else, in a land far away. And ultimately, as I hope we all know, running from the past, telling lies about where you came from, and so on, are losing battles because the truth always finds a way out. And inventing a past invites inventing a present and a future, something that ultimately bodes ill for stable democracies. Okay, let's move on. Other forms of distortion are more overtly anti-Semitic, like claiming the Holocaust was a positive or humorous historical event. There are also people who accuse Jews of using the Holocaust for some manner of gain. Now, we used to associate this form with rhetoric that came from the Middle East. Here we have, for example, one of the winners of the 2016 Holocaust cartoon competition in Iran, but this is actually something that happens everywhere. Blaming the Jews for the Holocaust is also a shockingly common phenomenon. This form of victim blaming is distortion because it's not only historically inaccurate, but it also lessens the burden of guilt on perpetrators or suggests that the Holocaust was somehow justifiable. Now, at times, there are those who suggest that there's something about the supposedly Jewish character, older anti-Semitic themes that led to the Holocaust. And in parts of Eastern Europe, you might encounter offhand references to something called Judeo-communism, the misbelief that Jews were overwhelmingly communist. This is essentially a coded suggestion that the Holocaust was just an anti-communist action. Either way it presents itself, blaming the Jews for the Holocaust is an unacceptable form of bait and switch that opens the door to anti-Semitism. State-sponsored distortion is also tricky. It can also appear innocuous at times, like a museum presenting imagery from the Nazi era without proper historical context. It can also be a bit more overt. Take this billboard, which appeared in Crimea right before it was taken over by the Russian Federation in 2014. It suggests that the people of Crimea had two choices: ruled by the Nazis, in a less than subtle reference to Ukraine, or peace under the Russian Federation. Now, is a billboard like this anti-Semitic? Possibly not, but it certainly links to and misuses imagery that we would associate with the Holocaust in a way that is cynical. There are also attempts, even today, to honor people whose actions or words helped lead to Holocaust crimes. And by this, I don't mean just the infamous Lukov marches that happened in the country of Bulgaria, or parades in honor of SS veterans that take place in Latvia, although these are certainly a symptom of what I'm talking about. I'm actually talking about a bigger problem, a problem of former perpetrator countries, a problem of countries that were occupied by the Nazis during the war, a problem of countries that were neutral, and in countries that were part of the alliance, including in the United States, Canada, Great Britain, France, and the lands of the former Soviet Union. There are attempts that lead to action, that lead to the rehabilitation, if you will, of people who were complicit in Holocaust-related crimes. Sometimes individuals will have their long past judicial sentences overturned, even though they're long dead. Other times, parliaments have taken official action to rehabilitate the reputations of people who collaborated with the Nazis because these individuals became important to national histories for other unrelated reasons. Sometimes these individuals have undergone what we might call cultural rehabilitation because they were well-known authors or other luminaries. Others are venerated and somewhat protected by religious authorities like the Roman Catholic Church. And there are some who escaped justice entirely and went on to fame after the war. To this list, we have to include some of the Nazi scientists brought to my home country, the United States, to work on our rocket program. Some of these individuals were in the SS and oversaw programs that made use of Jewish slave labor. This is what I mean when I say that this is a shared problem that nobody is able to walk away clean from. It requires a joint effort to push back. Attempts to fictionalize the Holocaust for the purposes of entertainment or commercial gain can also be problematic types of distortion, even when there's no anti-Semitic intent. So here, for example, we have two cases of Russian figure skaters wearing Holocaust-themed costumes. In parts of North America and Great Britain, from time to time, you can buy an Anne Frank Halloween costume. There have been Christmas ornaments for sale on Amazon, emblazoned with images from Auschwitz. And you can even buy toys of Adolf Hitler and his inner circle. I don't think I have to explain why these are problematic to you. And the use of Holocaust-related symbols is a somewhat obvious form of Holocaust distortion. So for example, here we have the flag of the Golden Dawn Party of Greece. It's not exactly subtle. But what about these? You might see something problematic in the flag of the All-German Heathens Front, a neo-Nazi organization with branches across Northern Europe. And if you knew that flag, you might be able to recognize something awry in the flag of the Nordic Resistance Movement, a different neo-Nazi band found in Scandinavian countries. Then things can get challenging. So here we have a group of American white nationalists holding a flag. And this flag doesn't evoke anything specific to the Nazis. Instead, they're holding the flag of the Romanian Iron Guard, the anti-Semitic and fascist party of Romania that existed between 1927 and 1941. To know why this is a hate symbol, you need a deeper knowledge base to draw upon, and there are even Holocaust scholars who would not recognize this flag when they see it. And even if you know what you're looking for, at times symbols can be hidden. So here we have a flag that will occasionally appear in the stands of Legia Warszawa soccer or football games. Sorry, soccer is the American term. At Legia Warszawa football games. Now the shield in the center is fine, that's part of the team kit, but I want to draw your attention to those triangles in the back. Those aren't sold on the official uniform. No, instead, those are so-called Gibor runes, or a Volksangel, a symbol used by some Nazi SS detachments in the 1940s. And you may say to yourself, well, calm down. Europe has laws against these things. Sort of. There are some European approaches that have allowed for at least the hypothetical application of laws to address anti-Semitism or Holocaust denial in ways that are seen as a threat to public order. And these are consistent with acceptable speech norms in some countries. These Holocaust denial laws were influenced by a law passed in France in 1990 that sought to protect facts from being misused. But what we've seen since 1990 is that a number of these laws have gone from protecting facts from abuse to protecting narratives from being abused. Now, what's the difference? Well, a fact is a fact, something immutable, but a narrative is the product of an interpretation. And if you're protecting interpretations of history, you open the door to at least potential distortion of the Holocaust. All right, I want to bring this home. Things are bad, but there are also signs of progress. There are entire communities at both the grassroots and governmental levels engaging with these issues, talking about the problems, and working to identify solutions. Just recently, the government of Sweden convened a major heads of state forum in the city of Malmö to talk about how best to ensure a future for Holocaust remembrance in a way that not only fights back against trends in anti-Semitism, but also trends that lead to distortion and denial of the Holocaust and other related crimes. In addition to the work being done at this governmental level, though, there are a few more suggestions on ways that society at large might want to respond. First, there's a need to enhance educational opportunities to learn, and not just about the Holocaust, although learning about the Holocaust is an essential component of what I'm suggesting. You also need to learn more about the general subject of disinformation and propaganda, because don't fool yourself. Holocaust distortion by itself is an inherently adaptable form of disinformation that can be used for all manner of purposes, including the radicalization of youth, or sowing discord in society, or simply causing anger and confusion among multiple audiences. We need to become better consumers of our media in order to discern the truth from half-truths or distortion. And if we do so, we need to go beyond just teaching this at the secondary school level. Secondary education is an essential foundation, of course, but we need to engage with the Holocaust and with related topics in our universities, in our trade schools, and in the training of our civil servants. Similarly, we need to call our politicians to account and not allow them to misuse the Holocaust for all manner of political or ideological ends. On the side of new media, while there's been a lot of talk about social media companies' responsibility to tackle online hate, we also need to better use these platforms so that we can communicate factual content about the Holocaust to counteract the counterfactualists that are out there. There are a few practical resources that can help you along the way. These include resources created by the Organization for the Security and Cooperation in Europe under the heading of their Words into Action program. And recently, on the Holocaust distortion side of the problem, we worked with the German government to publish not only guidance and recommendations for recognizing and countering distortion from a political angle, but 3 days ago published a booklet titled Understanding Holocaust Distortion that outlines in detail the history and many of the forms of distortion that we see today. Finally, there are institutions like my home institution, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, that seek to cater to international audiences with a wide range of international resources available in about 20 languages. There are also organizations like the Never Again Association that can direct you to other experts in the field. I encourage you to see all of these as resources for your development, and I also encourage you to stay in touch with all of us. Thank you.
So thank you very much. And if someone has questions to Robert Williams, or you can also share his questions in the chat, and we can also ask him later to respond. And now I would like to introduce Professor Dina Porat. Professor Dina Porat, she's our colleague for many, many years, and she's the former head of a Cantor Center, the first head of a Cantor Center for the Study of Contemporary European Jewry, and she served as the head of the Department of Jewish History of the Rosenberg School for Jewish Studies. And also she is a Yad Vashem chief historian, has been a Yad Vashem chief historian since 2010. And she was awarded prizes for some of her publications, including the National Jewish Book Award for her biography of Abba Kovner. And she also was one of the best teachers named by Faculty of Humanities of Tel-Aviv University. And she got a Raoul Wallenberg Medal for 2020 on the 50 leading Israeli scholars. We are very honored to have Dina Porat, Professor Dina Porat, and of course we are also very honored to have Professor Bauer with us. And I would say, and I would repeat, as I already wrote to Professor Bauer, but I am today as I was inspired by Professor to be. So thanks to Professor, I am as I am today. And that is why I'm so much involved in all these activities. So, but I will leave it to Professor Dina Porat to introduce Professor Yehuda Bauer for his keynote talk about the meaning of the Holocaust, its legacy and challenges for its commemoration. And also at the end, we have one young researcher from Bangladesh who is also involved in our project, interested in the topic. He also prepared some questions to ask. Now the floor is, I will give the floor to Professor Dina Porat. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Natalia and Rafal, for organizing this impressive gathering. And many thanks to the person who invented the Zoom. I don't know who he is, but he solved many problems. And here we are from so many countries together in this event. And Natalia asked me to introduce Professor Bauer, which I will definitely do in a minute. I'm so sorry to tell you that at 1:20 Israel time, I will have to leave you. We have another important event, but in the meantime, let me wish success to all the participants and introduce Professor Bauer and his work. Now, it's not an easy task. Yehuda, as we call him, or Yudale, Professor Bauer is the figure today in the field of Holocaust research. He is, I would say, the authority in the field, a person to whom you address questions, from whom you expect answers, and as Natalia said, inspired many people, many students, many researchers. But in connection with what Natalia and Rafal are doing here, in cooperation with the IHRA, in cooperation with the museum in Washington, I would like to emphasize a certain aspect in Yehuda's work. It is not enough to know a lot, to read everything, and believe me, he's reading everything and remembering everything. It's not enough to have many students and people inspired by you and write a long line of books. I think that Yehuda understood at an early stage that on top of research and teaching and knowing yourself, you need tools. You need tools. And indeed, he started with the late Professor Israel Gutman, may he rest in peace, with establishing an Institute for International Holocaust Research in Yad Vashem, an institute to the study of contemporary Jewry in the Hebrew University, and the encyclopedia of the Holocaust, the first one of its kind, translated to a number of languages. And on top of that, seminars for researchers, fellow researchers who keep coming from all over the world to Yad Vashem for seminars, for semesters. These are tools. These were local tools. What about the international ones? I think the IHRA is the main international tool, not the only one, that Yehuda developed. And indeed, he started it with a lot of vision in 2000, 21 years ago, in cooperation and the blessing of the Swedish Prime Minister, then Goran Persson at the time. IHRA started modestly, 5 countries, then 10 countries, today 34 countries, and a number of very major international organizations who are observers. So it is a kind of a center was created in which you have diplomatic work, because each delegation is represented by a high-level official. So you have contacts among countries, and you have diplomats coming, meeting, discussing problems, and you have experts working in working groups that address the major topics of today that are related to Holocaust research, to monuments, commemoration, archives, and in recent years, definitions. One of the top achievements of the IHRA is that it has in 2015 adopted the working definition of anti-Semitism. It existed before, from 2005. But since such an important international forum adopted it, it became, first of all, it's called now the IHRA definition. And it has been adopted since then. We counted some 700 government, universities, municipalities, football teams who adopted it. It's a major, major step in understanding and combating anti-Semitism. And on top of it, a definition of Holocaust denial. And another one on anti-Gypsyism, on anti-Tsiganism, of being against not only Jews, but against the Roma tribes. In order to save the time for Yehuda's lecture, I would like to emphasize one more point that I think relates to all of us. And this is that Yehuda established research tools, the IHRA. We should all remember also his participants and the involvement in two major organizations for preventing genocide. The genocide continued, unfortunately, after the Holocaust and after World War II, of preventing genocide. But I think one of his the main features of his work is that he has developed public involvement, answers for accusations, answers for, in the media, in the press, on TV, on radio, putting the matters on record, straightening complicated matters, trying to reach out to the general public, not to be closed within your work, academic work, not only even in these tools that he developed, in which a number of hundreds of people participate today in the IHRA. But to be, and I think this is really a message for all of us, especially the young among us, to be aware, to know what is going on, to be informed, and to be ready to answer, to be involved, to know what to answer, to study a lot before you answer, but to be really deeply involved. And I think in all these things, he showed us the way. I must also say on the personal level that he is really fun to be with. He has a great sense of humor. He's not just an academic and a heavy personality. For this, he has been given and awarded and bestowed medals and prizes and recognitions and honors that have no deep impression on him, that made no deep impression of him. And with this, I would like, with Natalia's permission, to give him the floor and to ask him to speak to us for the next 25 minutes about Holocaust distortion and the ways to challenge it today. Yehuda, we thank you in advance, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. for this very sort of warm introduction. What I want to do is really to follow up on what Robert Williams was saying, and I want to thank you very much thank him very much for stealing most of my thunder. In other words, saying what I wanted to say, so it sort of frees me to add to what he said. Now, why should people living in outside of Europe, in East Asia, Southeast Asia, and elsewhere, why should they deal with this problem? Because the Holocaust was a era-changing event. It was the most extreme form of something that is happening all the time, that has been happening for thousands of years. The annihilation, or the part annihilation, of groups of people for all kinds of reasons, with the exception of the Holocaust, all of them pragmatic. In other words, if you take the case that most of you are dealing with, the genocide in Cambodia, the ideology of changing the society, the Khmer society in Cambodia, was based on a dream of an economic and social transformation, a pragmatic transformation of society. The Holocaust was nothing like that. It was an attempt to annihilate the people for purely ideological reasons. Reasons that have their source in what we call ancient history, pre-Christian history, in fact, and then the history of the monotheistic societies in the West, Christianity and Islam. And the Holocaust is something that transforms our understanding of society, of all societies. That's the importance of it. And when you distort that, when you present this in a way that is contrary to the facts, that contorts the facts, distorts the facts, you are attacking your own society. And that is the crucial thing about distortion, you see. Distortion is not only the distortion of the past, and of course it is, and that's the main point, but it is a distortion of the present and the future. It prevents you from recognizing the dangers of the society that you live in. That's the tremendous importance of the denial and the distortion of that series of events we call the Holocaust, the genocide of the Jewish people at the hands of Nazis and their collaborators and lackeys and so on. And Rob Williams talked about that. Denial and distortion, as he put it very correctly, are two different things. Denial says it didn't happen, or the Nazis had never an intention to kill the Jews, or the number of Jews that were killed was minimal or very small. Certainly not the number that the people who say the Holocaust happened quote. And there were no gas chambers, and there was no mass killing. That's denial. And since the court case in 1999 and 2000 in London, a libel trial against Deborah Lipster, a very important historian of the Holocaust, who said that the Holocaust denier, David Irving, was a denier and an anti-Semite. And he denied something that happened. And he took her to court for libel. And the judge at the end of the trial a very British judge, Sir Charles Grey, he said, David Irving is a liar. He's not a real historian. He not only distorts the fact, he denies actual facts. Now, after that trial, in the West, Europe, United States, and so on, Holocaust denial exists and it's dangerous, but it's not really central. It's been pushed to the margins. In Muslim societies, not all of them, in some of them, Holocaust denial is alive and well. Not only Holocaust denial, in some of these societies, ideologists say the Holocaust happened, it was a good thing, and we will continue to do that in the future. They say it in so many words, such as Yusuf Qaradawi, a major Islamist theologian living in Qatar, who said in 2009 very clearly, yeah, Hitler destroyed many Jews, but not enough, and we will continue to do that in the future. So you have not only Holocaust denial, you see, you have the justification of the Holocaust and the promise to continue it. Now, distortion is something else. It is composed of several types of distortion, and Rob Williams mentioned all of them. The way that people who oppose vaccinations against the corona pandemic present themselves as Jews persecuted by the Nazis because they don't want to be vaccinated. That's nothing to do with the Holocaust. It's clearly an identification with anti-Semitism, with supposedly pro-Jewish symbols, yellow stars, or people who say that the whole business of dealing with, the governments publishing laws to encourage, or in some cases force vaccinations on people in order to prevent the pandemic from spreading, and they are identified with the Nazis, which is totally nonsensical, makes absolutely no sense. This is one kind of Holocaust distortion. It's not based on any facts. It's based on an anti-Semitic interpretation of anti-Semitism. It's based on causing a kind of a parallel between what happened in World War II and present liberal attempts to prevent a pandemic from spreading. That's one kind. But as Rob Williams mentioned very clearly, you have nationalism spreading in the world. Nationalism is now the great danger, to my mind, to any kind of democratic and liberal and society that's informed by a kind of a morality that we could accept. And in this kind of nationalism, you have to educate your people to be proud of your past in order to fortify your nationalist ideology. And you need a usable past. And when that usable past, heroic and wonderful and supportive of all the good things in the world, when that does not exist, you invent one. You invent a past that never happened. Now, distortion is, this type of distortion is not necessarily always based on lies. It's based sometimes on partial truths. When the distorted, in Eastern Europe today, for instance, say that the majority of the people, whoever the people is or are, wanted to save Jews. Yes, there were people who wanted to save Jews, and they were real heroes. The problem was that they had to hide the Jews or help the Jews, not only fearing the Germans, but fearing their neighbors of the same nationality who would denounce them to the collaborators with the Germans or to the Germans directly. So that's, partial truth, yes. They were wonderful heroes who tried to help, who tried to rescue. They did all they could. And very often they paid with their lives for helping Jews. So there is an element of truth. But the vast majority of the people did not do that. There were many, many dozens of millions of people living in the areas conquered by the Germans. How many of them helped? The people who did were heroes, yes. But they were a small minority. And the vast majority did not care, did not help. An example, an obvious example. Trains, German trains were crossing Europe and Eastern Europe. And the people very often in their majority knew that these trains were destined for a place from where the people on the train would never return. And there were undergrounds. There were underground movements against the Germans all over Europe. There was only one train in Belgium, which was derailed, a train that was carrying the Jews to their death. The people who derailed the train were a small Jewish resistance movement in Belgium, in Poland, in Hungary, in other places. The people who watched the trains, they knew more or less where the trains were going. Not one single train was derailed, not one, not one. Without the help of local people, the German Nazis could never have done, certainly not in the size of the problem which they created. They could not have done it without the help of locals. And the locals did not help the Jews in their vast majority. Now, this is something you see where the distortion means something for today in East Asia. When people are persecuted, when people are denied their rights, when people are killed, help. Help. Try your best. Go against the majority who want to look away, who don't want to deal with this. In the Holocaust, the distortion takes the form of creating a past that never was, that in certain elements of it did exist, but they are contorted, distorted. They tell you that the Jews more or less killed themselves. They tell you that there were Jewish council that collaborated with the Germans, that there were Jewish police in the ghettos that the Nazis created, that led the Jews to the trains, that went to the extermination camps. And there's partly truth in that. Jewish councils were not free elected councils, they were forced on the Jews. And if they did not obey every order, they were killed. But there were councils of non-Jews around them, all over the place. Mayors of cities, of municipalities, heads of villages, heads of fire brigades, local police, not German, local police. Did they object? Did they resist? They were underground, yeah. But the underground has been vastly exaggerated after the war. They were very important people. They were heroes. But again, they were a minority, small minority. And when they embraced larger groups, they did not help the Jews. Nobody of these distorters tries to compare what happened in their own societies with their own collaborators. How many were there and how many objected? And how many translated their objections to actions? And so when you have a distortion, you reach a point where you need the sources in order to make your argument. And in the case of Eastern Europe, for instance, liberal historians, they are the ones who tell us what really happened. And what really happened was that millions of Jews were killed by the Germans on occupied soil of Eastern Europe, yeah. But there was collaboration in killing the Jews, not the millions, hundreds of thousands, yes. And in some places, all the local administration, all the survivors, all the people who were around the Jews helped the authorities in putting the Jews on the trains and transporting them to their death in the in the extermination camps on Polish soil established by the Germans. So I think you see that distortion is a very, very major issue, an issue that you need to confront because it is not the past, it's the present. And this is one of the things that one has to remember when one deals with these issues. All the elements that created the Holocaust, and certainly all the elements that created other genocides before then and since then, exist today. It can happen again. To Jews, not only to Jews, to anyone, by anyone. It is something that is not a relic. This is not history of the past. This is history of the present. And unless we realize it, unless we deal with this as a present problem, dealing with the past, acting against distortion, yes, but dealing with the present in order to deal with the future, a future which no one of us knows what it harbors. We don't know what will happen in the future. Nobody knows. But we can influence the future by dealing with the present, and dealing with the present by dealing with the past. The past is never the past. The past is always the present, and the present is always the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Yehuda, so much for this powerful speech. And exactly as we said, Professor Bauer is an inspiration to us all for acting, for being involved, for understanding that we're not just in any ivory tower, but in reality, in today's reality. Thank you so much for this powerful presentation. And Natalia, I think you said that now it is time to start questions.
Yes, yes.
Will the questions be answered by Yehuda, by other participants? Who are the answering figures?
I think also we have our younger colleague from the Liberation War Museum from Dhaka, Bangladesh, who has some questions. What do you think if invite him to ask?
Please, you are the boss now.
Faisal Shahriar, are you here? Yes.
Yes, I'm here. Am I audible now?
Yes, but we don't see you. But
Okay, so I'll ask the question to Professor Yehuda Bauer. He gave quite a powerful presentation, quite a powerful speech, I have to say. So my question is, how do you think Holocaust can be commemorated in countries where the Jewish population or diaspora do not exist? Can popular culture medium like books, movies, and TV shows be an effective medium in these cases? And using these mediums to teach or commemorate the events or history of Holocaust, there is always the possibility of distortion of the history of Holocaust or racial politics or racist laws of the Second World War. So what can be an effective solution to these dilemmas?
I would like to ask Natalia to repeat the questions because my hearing is very bad and I can understand what Natalia says. So could you please repeat the question for me or else put it on the chat?
yes, maybe Faisal, you can put it on the chat. And Faisal asked, how do you think the Holocaust can be commemorated in countries with Jewish population or diaspora doesn't exist? And can cultural mediums such as books, movies, and TV shows can be an effective medium? In these cases, and using these mediums to teach, commemorate the events, history of.
I can't hear you. I'm sorry. Could you please put the question on the chat, and then it's all right.
Natalia, may I be of help?
Yes.
Oh yes, I can read it now. Yeah.
You can read it. Okay, fine.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. Of course, I understand that you're probably from India. There was a large Jewish population in India, for instance, which no longer exists. Not that anyone destroyed it, but they left. We get a lot of questions about the Holocaust from the countries where the Jews don't live. There are, for instance, 5 universities in China that have departments that teach the Holocaust. We get from India requests from high schools to provide them with information about the issue, detailed information. So the way to do this, I think, is to utilize existing international networks and contact them. And there are very major institutions, of course, that deal with this. In the United States, it's the Holocaust Memorial Museum. In Israel, it's Yad Vashem. In France, it's the Memorial de la Shoah. And there are other places. And there are individuals, for instance, a large number of very important academics in Poland who deal with this issue and whose names and so on one can easily find out. And they can provide you with the necessary information. Yes, I think it's very important that in the interest of a global culture and global mutual respect, I would say, and for people of different languages and different cultures, this should be engaged in, and we should do that. And I'm glad you raised the question. Thank you very much.
May I add something? Natalia?
Of course, Professor Dina
thank you.
Porat is our chair for this.
Yeah,
session.
no, it's okay. You are the chair. The beginning of the question was about the future of commemoration in countries where the Jewish communities are either small or non-existent. But I think what is happening today is that the digital means, the means are developing in such a way that, you know, we are asking ourselves not only about the Jewish communities, but what will happen when the last survivors will not be with us anymore, and we will not be able to hear their testimonies. So what is being done in order to prevent, let's say, to prevent the stopping of interest or dealing with the Holocaust, with anti-Semitism, with all the related issues, is to prepare in advance with the help of today's digital measures, not only museums and books and research, etc., but testimonies online, the museums online. You can, you know that you can tour Yad Vashem today, a virtual tour. You can have a tour. You can enter the site and find everything. You can even have, there are new tools, unbelievable, being developed. You can speak to a survivor who is not alive anymore, but you ask him questions and you get answers in his voice, because the answers are being taken from the testimony that he gave before, that he had given. So I think that you should not worry, because the issue is so important, so central, as Yehuda said, and there are today more and more new tools to have it known. Thank you.
I think there is also a question on the chat and some comments, and also question from the Venerable Lablu Barwa, who is a Buddhist monk from Thailand and Bangladesh and involved in our project. He wants to ask something. Venerable, dear Venerable, you have any questions?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon from the Thailand and our honorable moderators, and also the professors. Yehuda is a very excellent presentations and explain. We got a lot of knowledge from yours. And actually, when you teach a talk, you have mentioned some of the things like the genocide or the Holocaust genocide is also the changings or denying it changings because of the economic and social perspective. Nowadays, where the mostly the minority people living, like us in Bangladesh or like us in India, are not the one just minority peoples. Like us in India, you can say that Muslim are the minority people in India, and in Bangladesh, we are the Buddhist are the minority people in the Bangladesh. And sometimes we saw that on inside of the use of the religious misuse, some religious communal violence happen in our country, in Bangladesh, in India, even in Sri Lanka, because Sri Lanka is a Muslim is a minority there, and this happening. So this thing, do you think is like as a genocide, or you explain it is like as only religious communal violence? How do you identify those kinds of happening when these kinds of things happen?
Yeah, I understood the question, and I think one has to make a very clear statement about this. Humans are predators. historically speaking, the human race developed because hunters and gatherers killed other animals. And this is a part of our makeup. And it is true to say that some people say that humans are not very nice people. It's certainly, and now you see, when you take a definition like genocide, which is very problematic because the United Nations definition of genocide is very unclear and contradictory, and has not really led to any major breakthrough in preventing mass killings and genocides. Today, there are groups of countries and organizations that organize in order to create the tools, international tools, for prevention of what we now call mass atrocity crimes. Now, what are mass atrocity crimes? They are crimes against humanity, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, when the purpose is not just to remove a population, but to kill it, and genocide, defined not only by the United Nations in 1948, but added to that, the groups of people who are exterminated or annihilated because of economic and social reasons. And mass atrocity crimes today are the subject of a growing movement only since the 90s. So it's only 20, 25 years old, the whole thing, that led by some academics, but also by some very good diplomats. For instance, an organization called the Global Action Against Mass Atrocity Crimes, which was founded by the Swiss government and which today numbers about 36 countries. And people are beginning to formulate tools, realizing that humans are not very nice people, and realizing not, idealistic imagination, but dealing with concrete problems and looking at formulas that will satisfy the desires, the interests of countries within themselves or in their relation with other countries to improve the situation. You quote, for instance, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. You can quote a very large number of countries all over the world where problems arise that can be defined as denial of human rights, as persecution, and so on and so forth. One of the major issues there you mentioned, and that is the question of religion. Now, religion can be something that combines people. Religion can be something that divides people. And radical religion, in all cases, whatever the religion is, radical religion is a danger to society. So it is not something, that some great religious leader will make a wonderful statement. There are wonderful statements by great religious leaders, no doubt. But on the ground, priests and clerics and monks and so on and so forth kill. Despite the theory, despite, you must not kill. Actually, it says thou you should not murder. Killing is permitted. Murder is forbidden. Murder, you see, is permitted killing. And killing is forbidden murder. And people kill constantly. And so you need to advance realizing this, being realistic about it, and joining with others it's one of the major problems, I think I already mentioned it. Humans exist as a race because they kill. Otherwise, they would not have existed. Pre-civilization, without killing other animals, humans could not have existed. But on the other hand, we are very weak predators. As I look at my friend here who asked the question, he does not have the teeth of a tiger, and he does not have the claws of a bear. So he's a very weak predator. And in order to kill, and then not only to kill, but to grow things, to develop things, you need collaboration, which stands in contrast to the instinct of killing. And we have both things within us. We can collaborate and love and sympathize and help and rescue, and we can kill. We can do both. And your problem and my problem and Dina's problem and Natalia's problem and Raphael Pankowski's problem is how to have one side of human nature win the war against the other side of human nature. And the Holocaust is the most extreme case of one kind, the most extreme case. And distorting the Holocaust prevents us from finding solutions that we could live with.
I'm really sorry to say that I have to leave you, and I wish all participants as a fruitful continuation as it has started. Natalia, thank you so much, and Rafal, we miss you here. Please come for a visit.
Thank you very much, Professor Dina, for being with us today and for contributing. And maybe you will still join us next days. Or today afternoon. We have also very interesting presentations.
I'm sure.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much also, Professor Bauer, for your contribution, great contribution today. And I see there are so many questions on the chat, and because we don't have so much time to answer them now, but we can probably collect them and ask later. For example, also there is a comment about Myanmar, about Rohingyas, someone wrote. Tomorrow we will have 3 presentations about Myanmar, about Jewish community there, but also about how, for example, Holocaust work with Holocaust distortion can be helpful to work with against genocide distortion in Myanmar. So please check out program. And so many questions, also a question from about Eastern Europe, but I think we don't have time already. Maybe just 1 second, 1 minute if possible. Question from just a second, I see. What do in countries like Poland, where distortion narrative that all Poles save Jews is strongly supported by the government and national media, what to do? It's a very, very extensive question, and it probably needs a lot of time to respond, but maybe just very briefly, very quickly.
Do you want me to answer the question in the chat by Samantha Moreno? I have a question. I would like to know if the overuse of victimhood, which sometimes distresses nationalism, which has become a strategy to avoid teaching students the factual history of the Holocaust, can be considered a distortion of events. And how can we persuade or lobby our governments to revise the method of teaching the Holocaust? But nowadays, political correctness is more often than not preventing. I completely agree with the question. Yes, overuse of victimhood of who? Of the people who teach the Holocaust in areas where there are practically no Jews or very few of them live. Yeah, the victims are locals, yeah. And sure, they were also victims. The problem is the comparison of victimhood is totally wrong, because the fact that, let's say, Hungarians or Poles or Lithuanians or whoever were victims of Nazi regimes or fascist regimes and in Russia and so on and so forth, doesn't mean to say that you have a scala on which you can measure victimhood. The idea of the Nazis in the Holocaust was to exterminate all the Jews in the world. That was stated clearly. That has no precedent. But the form in which this was taken, the way people were victimized are no different. You cannot say that somebody, a Jew, was pushed into a gas chamber in Auschwitz, suffered more or suffered less than a Rwandan who was murdered with a machete, with a knife, or a Khmer who was murdered in Cambodia. You can't say that one suffered more than the other. Victimhood is always the same. So this kind of comparison is totally wrong. And yes, it is misused. And how can we oppose it? Well, it depends on the regime in your country, whether you can open your mouth or not.
Thank you very much, Professor Yehuda Bauer. Unfortunately, we don't have time because we have to move to another session, but we very much hope you are staying with us today and tomorrow also. And after today, now we are going to have a short break, 10 minutes. And after the break, we will have 3 presentations from Cambodia. One presentation will be about genocide, globalization of genocide denial, about multi-deniers who deny both the Holocaust and, for example, Khmer Rouge genocide. And another presentation will be about dealing with the past in the context of distortion of genocide in Cambodia. And we also will have presentation about Bopana Center work in Cambodia. So, and it will be moderated by our colleague from Battambang from Cambodia, by Vishal Sorn, who actively also participated in our meetings this year. And we are very proud to have here also with us today. So, and please stay also with us, and maybe we can also use chat for communication. And I very much apologize for the break. So now we have a break.
Thank you very much, Natalia.